Hi there, this is Jen, and thanks for joining me today. Today I'm making a fall mixed media card using a new to me stamp from Visible Image. And originally I was going to also use this really beautiful stencil here. It is called a Renaissance stencil, but I ended up changing my mind when I finished coloring the leaves. And so the stamp set that I'm using is called Erika's Maple, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp those up using some Versafine Black onto a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock. And I ended up stamping that up several times because I wasn't really sure what my layout was going to be, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough leaves ready to go. And so I went ahead and I stamped up 2 big leaves and 3 of the smaller leaves. And I'm going to color these with some Lindy's Magical Shakers. They're basically watercolor powders. They are activated with water, and so basically all you do is sprinkle the powder onto your project and then spritz with water, or even add water using a paintbrush to activate that color. So I'm going to go ahead and I use quite a few colors on these leaves. I'm going to try and list out, hopefully I got them all, but I'm using Oktoberfest Orange, Autumn Maple Chrisman, Bratwurst Brown, California Poppy Gold, Magnolia Magenta Gold, and Cathedral Pines Green. And I tend to call these watercolor powders because they activate with water. So it's a powder that has bursts of color in it, and they can be activated with water or a wet brush. There are lots of different variations of these out there. You've got the Nuvo, Creative Expressions, the Brushos, and then Ken Oliver has some as well. There's probably more that I can't think of. Those are the ones that I know because I have those ones, but they're really fun to play with. They're really fun to create with, just random different patterns and spritzes. Some have shimmer in them, some don't have shimmer in them. And I really love working with them, but I haven't used the Lindy's in quite a while, and so I thought I'd pull these out and use these. But really, you can use anything to color these leaves. The main portion of this video is going to be the embossing powder portion, and really the color underneath that can be pretty much anything that you choose to use. I'm just taking my paintbrush here and spreading that color out to make sure I've got the color where I want it on those leaves, and then I'm going to set these aside to dry, and then anything that's not dry by the time I need them, I will go ahead and take my heat tool and dry the rest of the way. And once those are dry, I went ahead and fussy cut them out, and you'll notice that I left the area by the stems pretty thick because I am going to need that to hang on to when I do the embossing. So here's one of the leaves that I have already used embossing powder on compared to one that's not. The color is pretty. When it dries, it kind of dulls out a little bit, and I really wanted that a bright color to show. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some ultra thick embossing enamel. This is also referred to as UT sometimes, and basically it is a thick granuled embossing powder. And so what I'm going to do with the leaves is I'm using a ink dauber almost. This is a Ranger, I think it's called Dauber It. It has embossing ink or clear watermark ink inside of it. I like to use that instead of the watermark pad because I tend to transfer a lot of color and then end up ruining my watermark embossing ink pad. So I went ahead and I took the embossing powder, I covered my image, and then I added a little bit more in that little pile that I had left from pouring the powder onto my leaf. And I'm going to use that to dip into after I initially heat set this. And once I have done the first layer, I'm going to run my heat tool over the entire image again to make sure it's hot. and that heat will grab the powder when it gets dipped in there, so you don't have to keep applying embossing ink. And I'm going to do that 3 times, so I have 3 layers of the embossing enamel. Embossing enamel is similar to, I'm thinking it's similar to the Tim Holtz glazes. It's basically the same concept. So if you have any white embossing powder, you can definitely color that and get kind of the same effect as the those glazes. But I'm using the Clair, and these granules are a lot bigger than your embossing powder that you would use for stamping details and sentiments. And so that means that it covers a larger area really nicely, so you can see that nice even coverage. And instead of kind of that dull color that we had before we put that powder on and melted it, you've got this really shiny, beautiful effect. I absolutely love the effect that this gives. It does harden, especially the more layers you have, so you have to be careful not to bend it or anything like that, because it will tend to crack if that happens. So that's why I made sure I went ahead and cut the images out before I used the embossing enamel. But I went ahead and I set those aside. I'm going to work on my background. I have a 5x7 piece of watercolor cardstock, and I am taking some Versafine Clair pigment ink in the color golden yellow, and I am using the Scripted Streets stamp. I'm using the scripty portion right now, and I am inking that up and then stamping it off several times on a scratch piece of paper, and then inking up my cardstock. And I also do the same with the other stamp in that set, which is kind of more of like the street map a stamp. And then I'm going to take some Prima watercolors. This is the terrain set, and I'm taking my water brush and I'm going to add a little bit of water to my cardstock panel, and then I'm going to use this, I believe this is sassafras, and I'm also going to use kind of that maroon color, more like a purplish maroon color, I guess. But I'm making sure to use some clean water switching between the colors so I don't mix them up too much. And then once I have the pattern that I want for my background, I'm going to take my heat tool and dry that up, and then I'm also going to use some paper towel to blot up a little bit of that water. But I am also adding some splatter using the 2 colors that I used for the background. And I want to make sure that's nice and dry because I'm going to add a little bit of gold splatter as well. And so I have gone ahead and added some gold to some metallic gold to my brush, and I'm going to splatter that as well. And then for the layout for my card, I had a little bit of a hard time. I went ahead and I used one of the sentiments from the stamp set, and I've stamped that in the same color of Versafine Clair, that golden meadow, just to make it really subtle. I didn't want it to stand out too much. And then I'm going to take some twine and wrap that around the card and then secure that in the back with a piece of tape. And since that twine adds a little bit of height to the back of the card, I went ahead and I grabbed a bunch of just random pieces of foam that were bits and pieces here and there. I wanted to get them used up, and so I added that to the back of the panel, and I am adding some adhesive, and that's going to be adhered to a piece of kind of a cream colored cardstock, and then I will take my trimmer and trim around the edges. And then I'm going to add a little bit of foam to the back of the leaves. And I'm adding the foam mainly to add some cushion to the back because the cardstock is kind of lifted up anyhow because of that thick embossing powder, and I just wanted to make sure that that didn't end up cracking somehow, and so the foam I think is going to hopefully cushion it so that that does not happen. And to finish off the card, I added some Stickles in the color goldenrod, and I also added a few sequins around the card, and that's going to finish it off. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed getting out some supplies that I haven't used in a while with this gorgeous stamp set from A Visible Image. I hope you enjoyed this process as well. If you did like this video or find it informative, I would love it if you would go ahead and give a thumbs up. As always, I thank you for spending some of your day with me, and I hope to see you next time.